Oh yeah, there is one thing that I intend to mention that was related to the DNC. I will bring it up again when I do more DNC related stuff, like reviewing speeches and sort of bringing in critiques as to what was happening there. This was there were a bunch of protesters, pro-Palestine protesters at the DNC. This was like the uncommitted movement. Um, Peaceful protest movement dedicated to advocating for a ceasefire and an arms embargo, critically, all sorts of divestment and stuff from Israel to try to basically take the pressure off of Palestine so that Israel stops bombing them, you know, and so that Palestinians might not eternally be fated to just die at the age of like 3, maybe. So they were protesting outside the DNC. Regrettably, they didn't even get a speaker. Like the DNC didn't let anybody from the uncommitted movement speak on stage. But they were outside the whole time, regardless. And there were some DNC goers who walked past them, and a lot of them, like fucking disgusting people, by the way. They're like plugging their ears, saying "la la la" as the uncommitted people were naming not just the names of dead Palestinian kids, but dead Palestinian American kids. And, dead Americans among the list of those killed, and people putting their hands in their ears, going "la la la la," and then one person, caught on film, or on camera rather, on film. Mocking the protesters for calling out the names of all the people killed in Gaza, which I think speaks to the unwillingness of the Democratic Party at an internal level, and that sort of thing, to embrace a pro-Palestinian cause. Because I assure you, as disgusting as that behavior is by the DNC goers, this is not representative of what the majority of Americans think. The majority of Americans are somewhat critical of Israel, at least to the degree that, like, yeah, Israel's been doing some pretty fucked up stuff in the Gaza Strip. In fact, I think a majority of Americans view what's going on in the Gaza Strip as a genocide, which is pretty correct. That is in fact what a genocide looks like. And it's like, it's a no-brainer for Democrats to sort of embrace this kind of more pro-Palestine movement. But because they're still Zionists due to, I don't fucking know, historical inertia at this point, or whatever else it is, they don't really care for it. And they decided to snub the opportunity to have a pro-Palestinian speaker on stage, avowedly pro-Palestinian, despite how like accommodating, conciliatory, and reasonable the uncommitted movement people were being about, like, look, here are some of the details of what we can speak about. You don't have to worry about us saying this, or this. We just want to advocate for this and this other thing. Mostly regarding bringing the hostages home, condemning the October 7th attacks, advocating for an arms embargo because Israel has been acting monstrously. And, the response from the DNC was basically, no, fuck you, also let's mock the dead Palestinian kids. Like, great, thank you. And by the way, this issue is not going to be infinite. There is going to be a point when either the genocide is finished, let's fucking hope that doesn't happen, or when Israel stops committing that genocide, and the dust is going to clear, and the international human rights orgs are going to come in and be able to survey the damage, and all of these liberals who were mocking pro-Palestinian protesters will suddenly change their tune. Never fucking let them forget that they were like this. All the people that are at the DNC that are, that are sort of optics frogging right now, all of the people that are like, well, I don't think this is really beneficial to our coalition. Well, is it really a genocide? All of those people are going to pretend that they were on board the whole time once all is said and done. Because we know exactly what the human rights orgs are going to find if they ever get allowed into Gaza to, collect data, survey damage, to rebuild in any appreciable capacity. They're going to find that hundreds of thousands of people have been killed. In fact, we already can reasonably say that at least 200,000 to 300,000 people have died, according to what estimates by the Lancet, I think. And we should all remember that the Democratic Party stood in the way of ending this genocide rather than getting on board, or at the very best of times, dragged their feet. Also, poor bastard drove off the stage, doesn't realize that's not a thing you can drive on. When you didn't hear, you're just spitting truth-spilling facts. Yeah. I wanted to talk about that a little bit because I saw a video on social media. Initially, I was thought like, maybe the Democratic Party might change their tune on Israel Palestine. The Democrats have certainly embraced unions. It would only stand to reason then that maybe they embrace the uncommitted movement or whatever, the pro-Palestinian movement. But no, they are the Democratic Party. Which is not to say most, people who vote for the Democratic Party, but the Democratic Party is as disgustingly Zionist as they've ever been. And, even they're not as bad as the Republicans, but, let's be real here, the Republicans aren't really in contention for office at this point. The object of the discourse right now is the Democratic Party. And, I was just making the point that, eventually the dust is going to settle. This can't continue forever, and it's not going to continue forever. Whether it be, God forbid, the genocide finishes and, Netanyahu actually kills all the Palestinians, or whether it be that, Israel finally stops bombing Gaza, the Democrats and the liberals are going to change their tune. Never let them forget. They did the same thing on every other, mass movement in history. Liberals, historically, as long as there has been a liberal system under which we live, liberals have opposed civil rights movements. Liberals in the United States opposed the civil rights movements of the 60s. They opposed the anti-war movement of the 70s. They opposed the protests against the Gulf War in the night. Well, actually, they didn't oppose that because it was a Republican president doing it, and the post 9/11 fervor wasn't in the air. That's the one W that they get. They opposed the anti-war movement in the early 2000s, and a lot of them still oppose the pro-Palestine movement right now. 20 years from now, they're going to pretend they were all on board, but we can't let them forget that they were just as stupid as all the rest. That's so disgusting. That's the course of history. And yeah, it is disgusting. And this is the fucking political party that we have to work with. We don't all want to die, which puts a bad taste in my mouth, puts a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths, but It's like we're handed these two options. One of them is the Republican Party, in which case we will get both a guaranteed genocide in Palestine and also a genocide at home against queer people, trans people, etc. Or we could get the Democratic Party, who are perfectly content to do nothing about the genocide in Palestine, but could potentially be pushed on it. Those are the options, and that's electoral politics. It helps, though. It helps that a lot of unions have been calling for a ceasefire, have been calling for divestment from Israel, have been way, way out ahead of the Democratic Party on this issue. And some of these unions were at the DNC, so there is some potential opportunity for internal pressure to be applied there. Or for some just, political pressure generally to be applied there. Like, hey, look, if you want consistent support from us and our members, you gotta shape up on this issue. What's DNC? Democratic National Convention. The DNC happened recently. In the United States, each political party has a convention where they have delegations come from all over the country to officially nominate their political candidate for office. That's the Democratic National Convention. They have a bunch of speeches there, and it's generally what it is. It's supposed to generate like it's supposed to kind of generate political excitement and to sort of advertise the political platform of the party, right? So what they choose to include there or disclude is very important because it signals what they are or aren't willing to support. And the DNC this year, the Democratic National Convention, was very willing to include unions, thankfully. You know, a lot of unions, some of them with a lot of openly and avowed socialists as their member, or maybe not openly avowed, but like very socialist-leaning members and leadership were there. But the DNC was extremely stubborn on the issue of Israel-Palestine. They allowed one of the families of the hostages to speak, but they kept the issue vague enough that they could continue to go to their line that this is all Hamas's fault and we have to stand with Israel, blah, blah. And they were very stalwart on not allowing any pro-Palestinian activists to speak at the event. You know? So that's what I was commenting on about the DNC. You know, because otherwise, the Democrats held a pretty well-organized and politically effective convention. They were able to generate a lot of political excitement with their platform. They were able to sort of advertise themselves, and it was clear that union politics and the politics of the working class were coming back. But it was still very clear that the Democratic Party of old, however much progressives had made advances, was still trying to reassert itself by, you know, shutting out the pro-Palestine movement, by insisting on having a lot of speakers that would only refer to the middle class, would only refer to small business owners, would only refer to stuff like that. You know, they tried to play both sides of it. You know, I think it was an interesting window into what politics in America is going to be like the next few years, especially because it is extremely unlikely that the Republicans are going to win the election. And, you know, I watched the DNC live. I streamed the last 2 days of it, but I had been watching the DNC over the course of the week. It took place over 4 days, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, and they held it in Chicago. You know, so all the news cameras were there. There was a bunch of people in the crowd and you know, speakers on stage, stuff like that. In fact, I actually don't know if Europe has an equivalent to that. If, like, European countries have an equivalent to, like, this, to these sort of grandiose party conventions. Partially because a lot of the DNC is centered around personality. You know, we don't have a like, proportional representation system. It's first past the post. So the focus is very much on candidates rather than parties. But anyways, that's not even going to be a segment on its own, because I intend for that to be like a separate stream where I go through the where I sort of go through some of the speeches from the earlier days of the DNC that I wanted to comment on, and then talk about like the critiques I have of the convention. Tina baby, we don't have that. We just have corrupt political groups that oppose each other but band together to fuck us up. Oh, so then you're familiar with the game. You're familiar with how politics works. You know? That's just bourgeois democracy, baby. That's liberal democracy, where you have a bunch of, you know, political parties that have, you know, somewhat different platforms from each other, but all of them are ultimately parties of big business. And small business too, but, you know, business all the same. You don't often have a party of the workers. And if you do, it's like it turns into either Canadian Labour Party or like UK Labour Party, where it just becomes captured by those interests over time, and then just becomes another party of big business. This time, it just says it's a party of the workers.